For many years, people believed there was life outside our solar system. Unfortunately for us all, they were right. Because as this morning comes, large mechanical monsters float their way through the vacuum of space and head towards a little blue and green marble floating in the void that we all know well. As the alarm goes off, the sleeping silhouette sees that the time is 0351. This body moves around, reaches and grabs the cell phone to turn off the alarm, and he lets his eyes adjust as his sleeping face winches from the light coming from the phone. He reads the message and then all of a sudden jumps out of bed, switching on the light that's closest to him, and then running from room to room, switching on lights, grabbing his clothes, strapping on boots, and running towards the door. He begins frantically beating on the doors down the hallway, screaming for everyone to wake up, we gotta go now. Get your shit on, let's go. He makes his way to the stairs as his phone begins to ring. He looks down and can see his platoon sergeant calling, "I'm already on, Sergeant, I'm getting him," is the only thing he says before he flips the phone shut. Then a voice seems to come over the speakers that rage across the entire post. "Alert, alert, all personnel report to their assigned companies immediately. This is not a drill. I say again, this is not a drill." The speaker repeats the message over and over as the figure runs down the street and into a building that has caged lockers on both sides. Fumbling with his keys slightly, he reaches up and opens his locker and begins to strap on an obviously custom rig that he had set up. The young man, mid to late 20s, throws his helmet on his short dark hair and has a coldness in his eyes with this sheer proficiency as he's throwing things on. Slightly built to the look, he finished putting on his equipment as he can see other people pouring into the room, beginning to open their lockers and do the same. He just screams, "Hurry up," as the stragglers run in and he runs out full speed down to the next building. By the time he drops his gear off in the company area, he gets to the arms room. The armorer is frantically trying to get the door open. Once he does, he begins to hand out weapons as fast as he can, not caring about weapons cards or protocol now. It's just get the weapons out and get them ready right now. The platoon leader is just a few steps behind him. The soldier that has his gear and weapon addresses him. "Hey, Sergeant, you have any idea what this is about?" He just looks coldly and says, "No." Leaving his bags behind, the young sergeant runs to another sergeant and asks the same questions and gets the same answer he gave the young one. Pulling a group together, he gets information and he takes a short pause. Taking a deep breath, he looks up. For a moment, it looks like the stars are moving. Before he can think about it, the platoon sergeant comes up. "Sergeant Sin," obviously a nickname, "get your men on the track line. Time now." He doesn't even have time to echo the order as he turns around and sees they're already moving. Without hesitating, the entire squad picked up their gear, weapons, and are running to the motor pool at full speed. They are all breathing extremely hard when they reach the track line. Most of the vehicles are already getting started. He can hear the turbines from the tanks begin to spin and come to life. The back of the Bradley fighting vehicles are already open and they begin to stow their gear as a small convoy of cargo Humvees rolls up and screeches to a halt. They begin unloading ammo from the back as fast as they possibly can. Within less than 2 minutes, the Humvees are offloaded and gone, and the vehicles on track line are already being loaded. By the time the Humvees come back, the vehicles are finishing loading the main weapons on the Bradley's tanks as everyone assists the tankers in loading the heavy shells into their magazines. The next load of Humvees shows up with a whole bunch of small arms ammo, everything from 5.56, 7.62, mortar rounds, 203 rounds, it didn't matter. They were bringing it all and basically throwing it off the side and then just running back for more. The soldiers were visually weighed down with magazines and ammo as they pulled out the rockets, claymore mines, mortars, grenades, and off the Humvees went to load and begin to load themselves up again. By now, the sun was just beginning to show itself. The commanding officer yells to the entire battalion. Everyone double times over to him, thinking they were going to be told they did a great job in this drill. Once they're all near him, he began to speak. Alright, listen up. This is going to sound very strange. We are currently being invaded by alien forces. Everyone looks confused, but he continues. They are currently dropping through our atmosphere and should make planetfall within an hour. Their projected targets? Pretty much every major city around the world. This division's mission is to stop them cold as they try to take Austin, Dallas, Fort Worth, and San Antonio. As for this battalion's objective, there's an uneasy rumbling as everyone begins to realize he is just not joking. This battalion's mission will be Dallas. They will be on the ground by the time we get there, so expect heavy resistance. Now mount up! No one hesitated as they all moved with an insane motivation. The column of vehicles was ready to move and began to move within the next 5 minutes. The only people still on the track line at that point were the ones directing where vehicles were going to go, so you obviously didn't run into each other. And then the last vehicles paused as they jumped on. Over the radio, it was complete silence. In the back of the Bradley, there was not silence. All the young soldiers looked to the one man, the one we had watched, to tell him what was going on. But what do you tell men you may be leading to their deaths? Hey, Sergeant, do you know anything about this? One soldier asked. Another one asked, yeah, I mean, fucking aliens? Sounds like the BC's been hitting the crack too hard. Another one's, hey, it's not like you're the one saying it. First soldier responds, it's true. You got it true. I mean, I saw the general's Humvee go flying past me like I wasn't even there. Another soldier said, well, you're easy to forget. First soldier said, funny, asshole. Couldn't this just be a drill? I mean, come on. Another soldier chimed in, I've done a tour before. This feels real to me. Another one way in the back, sure does. Turning to the NCO, what do you think, boss? The young sergeant sits silently for a few moments, feeling that cringe in his gut, the one that tells him he better be sharp. He looks at them and says, all I know is this. A lot of people are going to die today. Reaching the charging handle, he charges his weapon and double-checks the safety and closes the dust cover. After a few seconds, the rest begin to do the same, with the exception of the saw gunner, as you don't do that. No words were spoken, just a few more piercing glances to each other. An hour in the trip, none of them had caught any sleep. With the hatch open, one of the lead track commanders spots something over the horizon. Pulling up some of his binos, he gets a first look at one of the invaders. It was a strange machine off in the distance. It appeared to walk? It moved with a deliberate grace directly at them, and it was not alone. 7 others of different shapes and sizes were on its right and left. Not only that, but there was movement around them, something that seemed to bounce up and down. However, there's no time to worry about that. Dropping into the turret and slamming the hatch, he began to yell over his comms, a broadcast that would be heard over every speaker in the convoy. Contact left! Multiple unidentified units approaching. The battalion commander's voice came in a few moments later. Confirm, multiple enemy units. 5 kilometers out and closing, fast. All units, flank left in 3, 2, 1. With that, the entire convoy turned 90 degrees to their left. And then the word, engage at will. The entire convoy looked up to see these strange beings and locked onto them. It was an odd moment of peace before the entire air caught fire. Tow missiles, main gun rounds, 25 millimeters, 105s, 81 millimeter mortars fired, along with all sorts of rockets and missiles from both sides came flying and intersected. But what scared the shit out of everyone else is there was strange energy weapons being used. Odd balls of lasers shot from all different directions. They couldn't make out what the hell was going on. All they knew is whoever they were, they wanted this convoy dead, and they wanted them dead quick. As the Bradley that the soldiers were in began to take evasive action, the driver was not being subtle and was smashing those in the back, side to side. The infantry in the back were desperate to get out. The sergeant grabbed the comms in the back and just yelled in, "Drop ramp now!" as he reached up and waved to his men, and they started beating on the side of the turret, trying to tell the people to drop ramp. The commander of the Bradley said, "We can't, we're still moving." Without skipping a beat, the sergeant yelled, "Drop ramp or I'm going out the troop door." After a few seconds, the ramp didn't open, so they just popped the troop door and began to fall out on the ground. Before they all got out of the Bradley, they were hit by a volley of explosives. These explosives rocketed every single section. It was not a direct hit, but it was close enough to make it shudder and shake wildly. One soldier fell back inside the Bradley as it's pushed back a few feet as it comes on top. Black smokes began to pour out of the troop door as the rest try to climb out. Coughing and gagging, the rest of it make it out with one exception. As the smoke begins to settle enough to see, the sergeant stuck his head inside. He didn't even have to check to realize it was too late. Though most of those missiles had missed as they had fired in a volley, one or two had hit the driver's hatch, killing him and the passenger directly behind him. Pulling his head out, he looked over to the rest of them. Shaking his head slightly, he began to look around to the vehicle. He then grabbed his bag and yelled, "Let's move!" As the turret of the Bradley continued to run, the barrel hot. The soldiers grabbed their assault packs and began to follow under the fire of the do-do-do of the Bradley fire and the constant boom of the 105s being fired from the Abrams. By this time, the battle had begun to spread out. The rest of the column had caught up and were attempting to take out the walking vehicles. Many of his forces were destroyed or disabled. The walking vehicles had not gone unchallenged, however. Over half were on the ground smoking, and one seemed to burst in a tremendous explosion. However, they were not the only threat. Other vehicles threw back death at the tanks and the other armor. That's when the sergeant finally saw what had been jumping around. The humanoid-looking machines jumping on the armor and seemingly tearing it apart with their bare hands. Then they would either rip the driver or gunner out of the seat or just fire into the hole. Some even used flamethrowers. As he watched, several of those inside the tank would pop open their hatch and come out completely engulfed in flame. Across the entire battlefield, enemy and allied infantry traded blows as the heavy armor fired across them and over their heads. Grabbing what they could, the squad, already beginning to be gauged by the enemy, began to move through the wooded area close by. Even the young soldiers were able to find their groove together as they began to take back ground from the enemy infantry, though it didn't take long before those enemy humanoid machines began to turn their attention on the squad. One ran up and picked one of the soldiers by the arm and held him up. A young soldier next to him began to fire his M249 saw wildly into the armored monster. It became obvious that 5.56mm rounds were completely useless against this thing. The free robotic arm simply raised up, and 3 red beams of light pierced through the man's chest, clean through the body armor. The rest of them began to pull back to get some distance from this behemoth. As that monster seemed to follow them back to their lines, he received an 84mm surprise for his trouble. The shoulder-fired rocket tore open the armored hull and tore apart the man inside. Seeing this, they used the few remaining rockets that they could scrounge up to do the same to the other mechanical monsters. But soon, they ran out, since they were fire-and-forget weapons. Then they only had a few more tricks. As hastily as they could, they put up any claymore mines they could find and enticed the infantry units close. Then they gave them a present wrapped in a brick of C4, but this only brought a bigger response as the enemy saw the explosion. And holding back the enemy at that point seemed nearly impossible. As they began to fall back, the squad continued to fall one by one. It looked for a moment that some of them may escape. That is, until one of the walking units made its entrance. Clearly damaged, but still packed a hell of a punch. Unleashing a volley of missiles, several of the soldiers were torn apart. One body from a young grunt was thrown into the sergeant with so much force that his helmet actually came off as it was threw the sergeant into the side of a disabled tank with enough force to knock him completely cold. Leaving him behind, the enemy believed he was dead, and the battle around him would cease less than 20 minutes later. A few hours later, the sergeant opened his eyes. His body cried out in pain, but he forced himself to move. He tried to get a drink out of his camelback, his hydration bladder on his back, but he realized the tube that had been over his shoulder had been shot clean off. Grabbing the tube and sucking what he could out of what was left, he looked around. Pushing the body off of him, all he could see was the dead. There was no sign of the enemy, and now he got a good look at the enemy as he walked up. They looked human, but they looked like they'd been shot up with steroids on crack wrapped in PCP. Each one he saw was firm, muscular, tall, and he saw something he almost couldn't believe. Several of these enemies were female. Not that that's unheard of, but the amount was surprising. The claymores had made quick work out of several of them, and is enough to make him almost regret it. He began to look around for any friendly vehicles or survivors at least. By the time he reached the first vehicle, the pain in his body was enough for him to take off his body armor. Walking from vehicle to vehicle and person to person, he had collected a small bag full of dog tags, but had found no survivors. Some of the tags he had to pull off still smoldering corpses, even a few he found on the ground as the bodies had been torn apart with direct hits. As the sun set on that first day, he finds himself in a disabled FLA, field litter ambulance, pulling off his shirt as he begins to see the full extent of his injuries. His entire torso, from front to back, is bruised. Where his plates were now black and purple. Pulling out the plates from his armor, he can see they're broken and will no longer help him at all. Tossing him next to his busted bladder pack, he begins to check his wounds. What seems like a few cracked ribs and a sore back, along with a bunch of cuts and bruises, will only get first aid this day. Everything else will have to wait until he can reach an actual doctor. He begins to fall asleep, the radio in his ear, waiting for something, anything, where to hook up with the rest of the army. At 0153, the radio sends a message. Garbled transmission. To any survivors, this is Eagle 6. New orders are to head west to California. I say again, head west. This message repeated until the sergeant actually grabbed the comms and said, break, break, break. Eagle 6, this is Sergeant Sin of 4th Infantry Division. Over. There's a pause for a moment. And then another voice comes over. I read you, Sergeant. Put your 6 on, over. Eagle 6, you're talking to him, over. Pausing again before responding, the radio says, go ahead, Sergeant. The sergeant responds, what about the eastern part of the country, over. The radio, without skipping a beat. We're pulling the battle line to the Rocky Mountains. We will engage from there, over. Confused, he keys the radio again. Eagle 6, that does not answer the question, over. There's a slightly longer pause until a slightly annoyed voice comes back over. This is an order from your commander-in-chief. Pull back now. The sergeant. Eagle 6, I need confirmation. Are we abandoning the eastern half of the United States? Over. Another longer pause. The radio responds. Only for now, Sergeant. Assemble your troops and follow your orders. The sergeant is now disgusted with the idea of falling back after he'd been wading through bodies all day. He thinks for a moment before responding. I will protect the people of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. The radio snaps back. You will obey the orders of the officers appointed over you. The sergeant then responds, I will always place the mission first, and I will never accept defeat. I will never quit, and I will never leave a fallen comrade. The radio responds, do not argue with your superior, Sergeant. Now retreat behind the Continental Divide. The sergeant is just absolutely disgusted at this point and simply says, I will not use my grade or position to attain pleasure, profit, or personal safety. Over. The radio responds, you will follow your orders, Sergeant. You will abandon your position and head west at best speed. Those left behind are to be considered lost. Do you understand your orders, Sergeant? Over. The sergeant. I will never leave a fallen comrade to fall into the hands of the enemy, and under no circumstances will I ever embarrass my country. Readily will I display the intestinal fortitude required to fight on the objective and complete the mission, though I be the lone survivor. He didn't even bother with over at that point. The radio responded, Are you finished, Sergeant? Now confirm that you're heading west. That's an order. Over. The sergeant didn't even respond. He actually tossed the mic down and sits back. With only a chem light to illuminate the inside of the vehicle, he shook his head and began to think. But soon, he fell asleep again. As he wakes the next morning, he climbs out to find the sun has not even begun to rise. Ripping open a loose MRE, he eats and watches the sun begin to rise. Once he finishes, he begins to load up on a salvage vehicle. Thankfully, the driver had driven it off the road and abandoned it. After getting the charred remains of the gunner out of the cab, he begins to load it up. Food, water, ammo, medical supplies are his primary concerns. Hooking up a trailer, he loads that up as well. After replacing the .50 caliber on top and siphoning some extra fuel, he's ready to move. Driving for only a short distance, he can see the Dallas skyline as pillars of smoke are rising from the buildings. As he begins to enter the city, the level of destruction became evident. No one seemed to be spared as bodies littered the streets. There was no military presence except a single aircraft that had been shot down, unfortunately with the pilot still inside. After retrieving the pilot's tags, the sergeant noticed something on the horizon, something almost egg-shaped, and as big as a building, but not a building. It was smoking from a few small areas and had obviously been shot up, but it looked intact. Driving close, he could see that was, in fact, a ship. Around its base were several of those human-sized enemies. Slamming on the brakes, the sergeant climbed into the gunner's hatch as the driver's windows were shot out by projectiles and lasers. Holding down the butterfly, the sergeant began to tear through the enemy troops. The .50 caliber bullets had enough punch to go straight through those suits, causing the enemy to fall, even from slight hits. After reloading, the sergeant came to see that his aim was good enough. The two enemies moved, but were obviously injured. Climbing out of the turret, he grabs an M14, along with a vest full of ammo, and rushes into the ship. Heading from room to room, he finds it almost completely deserted. Opening one door, he finds prisoners, along with their interrogators. One reaches for his sidearm and ends up with a 7.62 millimeter in the chest. Seeing this, others raise their hands and so surrender, then start saying something the sergeant can't understand. One reaches into his shirt and the sergeant aims his weapon at his head. The prisoner on the side raises his hand and says, "Wait, there's no need to kill them." Keeping his weapon locked on the enemy's forehead. "Can you give me a reason why? And a reason why these guys are speaking in what sounds like Latin?" The prisoner says, "Because it is Latin. And these two are surrendering to you." Confused, he said, "You speak it?" Another prisoner says, "Yes, all of us here do. That's why they brought us here." The sergeant pauses for a second. "Then tell them to put their weapons down now." One of the prisoners speaks to the remaining interrogators, and the interrogators put their weapons on the ground. "All right, now take the weapons and bring them along, but keep them in front of us." The first prisoner asks, "Where are we going?" Sergeant says, "To the bridge. We need to take control of this ship." One of the prisoners speaks as the two of them lead out. The sergeant seems impressed at the size and build of the two they just captured. They reach the bridge without incident. Then the sergeant reaches the doorway and takes control of the bridge crew by clearing the room. With the help of the interpreters, he gets them all to broadcast a message to the crew as to report to the bridge. Within minutes, the entire remaining crew is captured. The sergeant looks, "All right, do we have any medics in this group?" The prisoner responds over to the ones he had captured, and they respond, "Only one." Taking a deep breath, he says, "Fine. Tell them that the sentries down at the bottom of the ship need medical attention. Take the medic and another to help you with the aid station. But if they even think about trying something," he lifts up a grenade, "I'll make sure none of them get out of this room." Once they leave, the sergeant turns to the other prisoner. All right, I want to know everything. Where they come from, why they're here, everything. The prisoner dictates to those who had come down to the planet, and they start talking back. He states, they are called Clan Wolf. Soldiers genetically engineered for combat for over 400 years. Whoa. They have been bred and trained to take over worlds. It all started with the enemies of Kerensky after a government called the Star League took power. Kerensky took his armies to the farthest reaches of known space, and that is when they prepared for retaking of the home planet Terra. However, the invasion did not go as expected, and they stopped short of reaching their goal. After which they have been fighting for planets for survival, neither side having enough power to outright destroy the other. Nor would they want to. The clans have been trying to continue their campaign. The sergeant interrupts clans, as in more than one. The prisoner gets a response. Yes, there are 15 to 20 of them around the universe. It seems as though the last conflict decimated their fighting ability to each of their governments, or this includes the clans. So they came up with a new strategy. Even though they don't like each other, they would bid, yes, they would bid for the selection of the planet and perform a trial of possession. I guess it means winner take all. This would limit the amount of clan losses and maximize their efficiency. The sergeant asked, then why did they have to kill everyone in this city? The prisoner gets a response. It appears that not everyone was killed. There was a high fatality rate, but the remaining population is being held in a holding area at the north end of the city and are awaiting orders because the invasion here didn't quite go as planned. The sergeant asks, what do you mean? When he says that, and it was changed over to the clanners, the clanner asks the question and stands up. The sergeant immediately draws his weapon on her, and the prisoner says, wait, you don't have to do that. The sergeant says, you got a good reason? The prisoner says, because before, when you rescued us, they said you were their bondsmen. The sergeant looks at him. What the fuck does that mean? The prisoner gets a long explanation from the translator, and the translator simply says, according to the laws they live by, once a person has been beaten and captured, the winner can choose to accept them as bondsmen, as their warriors. In other words, if you accept them, they serve you. The sergeant thinks for a few seconds. How do I know they won't just turn on me? The prisoner gets a message from them. It's a matter of honor for them. The sergeant thinks intently. All right, tell them I accept them all as my bondsmen. They now serve as my soldiers. The prisoner tells them, and these clanners seem to suddenly relax a little bit, but in a way that was confusing. Now, back on the subject, the sergeant says, why did their plan not work? The clanner goes to the monitor, punches a recorded message, and obviously takes them from space. The clanner begins to talk, and the prisoner interprets for them. This is from one of their ships in orbit. About 10 hours ago, they were supposed to be bringing supplies to the surface. On its descent, it encountered these missiles. The sergeant recognized them immediately. These ships in orbit were going to let them pass between the ships, and then, since they could easily dodge them, and then on the screen, an explosion is seen. A quick flash of light, and the camera is torn apart from the hulls, and has began to detonate. Even one of the largest ships took nearly a direct hit, and seemingly almost broke in half. The interpreter says, oh my God, were those? Sergeant says, just up nukes. Keep going. The prisoner shaken a little bit. Seeing as those ships that were hit lost control and men began to lose their orbit, from the few remaining vessels pulled away from the planet without the large ones to dock with, they began to run to the surface. Once touching the atmosphere, they came under increasingly heavy fire from human aircraft. The visuals show human aircraft just buzzing past these dropships, dumping all sorts of ordnance into them, a few of them losing their ability to slowly land and instead plummeting towards the planet. It seems as though our planes are better able to fight than theirs. This one made an emergency landing here where things had been secured. The other ship is sitting next to a civilian holding area. The image on the screen changes to the other ship on the screen. There are none of those large bipedal machines, only about half a dozen of those armored troops, and another dozen or so of regular infantry. It seems that the missile attack disabled the ships and they were destroyed when they got caught up in the planet's gravity well. And unfortunately for them, that was their only way of jumping back to their galaxy. So they're stuck on this planet. The sergeant raised his hand. That's enough. Those machines they use, I need to know about them. Pointing at the closest one. Soon a different image appears. The prisoner translates. This is what they call a battle mech. The sergeant's eyes fill with hate at the sight of this thing. So that is what you call one of them? What else? The prisoner continues to translate. It is the clan's primary weapon system. It has more firepower than probably a company of tanks with armor to spare. The sergeant thinks back as he continues, he saw many tanks hit these machines and they simply staggered instead of exploding. Being bipedal, it can traverse terrain better than any vehicle. The sergeant just asked, do they have anything else? The prisoner asks, they respond, and the prisoner's eyes open as he says, tanks, assorted vehicles. They don't like artillery pieces. This is the list. And then a list is shown up on the board. Unfortunately, it's in Latin. He looks over at the interpreter and says, have you forgotten I can't read this? Oh, sorry. Well, it looks like they also have some aircraft, although according to this report, they won't be flying for a while. The sergeant says, I need to know how many people are capable of working these machines. The prisoner asks, and after a response, he says, according to this, all of them. The sergeant says, great. Tell them I want all their battle mechs and vehicles ready for immediate mission. And the clanners, hearing this, scurried to work. The sergeant said, I need a complete readout of the holding area and any other forces within 150 kilometers. The prisoner, being a translator, it appears the only group within 400 kilometers is the one at the holding area. Here's the layout. The sergeant looks at, this is how things are going to work. He then laid out a battle plan and the unit moved out. They moved into position without being confronted as the IFF, Identify Friend and Foe tag, was still reading Clanner. They completely encircled the enemy machines and personnel. Once all units were in position, they relayed the message to the interpreter, who happened to be named Don. Through the sergeant's command, attention all clan wolf forces. You are currently surrounded by mechs and armor that you probably think is your own. Surrender now and I will make you all bondsmen. If not, then I will have no choice but to have you cut down with ruthless efficiency. A voice over the radio in Latin had to be translated. This is Star Captain Lucinda. You have captured us, and by our code of honor, we have now become your bondsmen. The sergeant responded, your first order is to return to the ship and guard against any incoming forces. However, any civilians you have taken into custody, you're going to protect them. He pointed at the two mechs. Those two are to stay and pull sentry guard. Have them face out. The rest of you assist me in taking care of the civilians. Don relays the order, and the sergeant moves over to the holding area, where the majority seems to be women and children. Only a few combat-age males remain. They're obviously gang members and obviously scared out of their minds. He walks among them with Don and a radio behind him. He finds a place where he can address everyone from, and then speaks to them. You are all probably wondering what the hell is going on. Well, I'm going to spell it out for you. Without firing a shot, we just liberated this city. You're all free to go where you desire. However, there are things I think you should know. First, these people are not human, if you haven't put that together already, but rather an alien species. Second, there will most likely not be a second wave. Their ships in space have either retreated or have landed on this planet. We now have control of both the ship that landed in the city and the one behind you. The remaining military forces of this country have been given an order to abandon the eastern half of the U.S. and hide like a bitch behind the Rocky Mountains. This was given by the politicians, I'm sure. There will be no reinforcements coming from our side. This tells me that they have given up all rights regarding to the sections they have abandoned. Texas is now free from the U.S. He lets that settle a little bit as he continues. There are still plenty of enemy forces on this continent, and I will be taking these forces and continuing to fight. For that reason, I am only going to ask this once. Who amongst you wants to join me in taking back our planet? The question cuts through the air like a knife, but there's no answer for a few seconds, until a small voice comes from the crowd. A young girl screams out, "I'll join you." The sergeant is a little taken back by the fact that it was just a child, only a child, to respond at that point. The gang members are some of the last ones to rise up. Still, some elected to remain quiet. The sergeant continued, "Those of you that are willing, step forward. Everyone else, I ask you to give support in a non-military fashion." One of the gang members yelled out, "Like what?" The sergeant said, "Like farming, ranching, mining. We still need civilians to assist us." Of course, there was no disapproval. "Since that is over, please step forward and register with us. Remember to tell us whether you're going to be serving as a civilian or a citizen under my command." That last spot seemed to put some of the people on edge a little, but didn't stop them from going through the registration. By the time the sergeant is finished, it is after sundown, and he is billeting everyone in a hotel that hadn't been blown apart. Using a power line from a dropship, they were able to get water and power working, and that night he talks to the command staff. "We have several children in this group. They're going to need training starting tomorrow. According to your files, this should not be a problem." He assigns an interpreter and 2 clanners to begin the training with the children. "I'm not going to change your radar watch, but I do need the intensity turned up a little bit. I was able to get in virtually undetected, minus those 2 at the front. Others can do the same. Watch will be put up using at least 2 mechs and 4 of those elemental suits. This will be on constant rotation that will change out every 3.5 hours. The clanners were continuing to shuffle papers as he spoke. "In addition, the small dropship will be moved to the airport along with more than half of the fighters available. Even though they'll put both dropships at the airport, is the only way to maximize security. As for the adults, they are the ones most likely in need of training. They will need to be rushed through, but do not create substandard soldiers. We all know that could be a death sentence. According to the data we have, the closest group of clan forces is in San Antonio, and it's about a 4-hour ground movement. And in the morning, I'm going to take a group with me, and we'll get eyes on their station. If all goes well, we will be able to give a complete recon and analysis of their defenses when we return. Until then, Star Colonel Thastus is in command. 1 interpreter will stay with you so that you can direct your soldiers. Don," the first interpreter, "will be coming with me along with 4 of our best scouts. That is all. Get on your assignments, and I'll see you all in a week." Everyone leaves, and the sergeant stays to analyze the few maps and shuffle around the forces he has. At the moment, it looks like there is an even split in the human-to-clan ratio. He wonders if that's going to keep things calm. Around 0630, a pickup truck is loaded with enough MREs, water, and fuel for them to make the trip. 6 of them load up, and the clanners in the back watch as the dropship disappear into the horizon. 4 hours later, they dismount around the city limits. There are 2 of those large dropship and another one of those small ones, As they scurry around the city, the sergeant notices that the emblem on the side of the ships the vehicles is different. No, it's not different. It does match those in Dallas. For 5 days, they sat and watched. For 5 days, they took down notes on everything that was going on. And for 5 days, they figured out how to take the clanners down quickly and efficiently. The holding area had been lightly guarded and could be easily taken down. Infiltration teams would be needed for the dropships, and a strike force would be needed for the rest. On arrival of the team back to Dallas, the sergeant immediately assembled the leadership to find out how far the new soldiers had come. One of the clanners, being translated to him, said, "The children listen well and push themselves hard, but I believe some of them are pushing themselves beyond their limits. In some cases, the children have passed out in the middle of training." The sergeant kind of smiles and said, "They're eager with vengeance. They'll make the best of us one day. Assign a medic to keep watch over the children during the day, but allow them to keep this intensity. It'll serve them well, especially as adults. Now, speaking of adults," he turns to the two in charge of them. Another clanner talks up and says, "We have been having some disciplinary problems with a few of them, but the rest are working out well. They have already grasped the basics and are almost ready for practical application." The sergeant says, "I will leave you two to handle any disorderly ones as you see fit. The rest of you have to get them prepared for the first taste of combat. We will take San Antonio soon. How are the civilians working out?" Another clanner comes up. "Surprisingly well. There have been several new arrivals since you've been gone, and they've been working diligently to get us the supplies we require." "New arrivals?" "Yes. 4 more have come to join us. However, they only wish to serve as civilian status. As long as they're registered to work and they work hard, I leave it in your hands. Now on to our assault San Antonio." After laying out the plan, everyone starts to prepare. Much to the clanner's dismay, the battle mechs will be joining the battle at the last line. The sergeant leads the infiltration teams aimed at the dropship. With only a small contingent guarding Dallas, they're off. The sergeant gets everyone in position at around 0230, and they sprint for the ships. They have 15 minutes to get to the bridge and take control of the ship, or things are going to get really nasty really quick. The clanners with him move so fast and effortlessly, for a second the sergeant thinks he'll need to be carried to the bridge. Although once inside, they take over the bridge of each of the ships and immediately begin an immediate lockdown of all systems. Within the ships, doors are sealed, and with no one in the engine room, they have successfully captured everyone on board, even though they don't know it yet. Now it's time for the holding area. One of the ships is parked right outside the wire and can get shots off in the guard positions, just in case things go bad. One by one, the positions are taken down, and soon there's only one more target left. The 2 mechs on patrol are on their way back with everyone in position. They get ready to spring the trap. As the enemy mechs turn down the street, they suddenly stop as they read their radar and see mechs heading their way. Frantically, they send a message. "Command, this is Fang 2-3. We are reading 2 lances of mechs heading directly to our position." The response was, "Fang 2-3. We are sending reinforcements to your position. Head northeast corner of the city. Reinforcements will meet you." With that, the 2 trot along and don't even notice they're about to walk over a bridge. As they do, explosives detonate and the bridge gives way underfoot. A few moments later, the 2 mechs are stuck waist deep and begin calling for assistance, but they get a different message. And it's from Sergeant Sin, as he greets them in broken Latin but is translated. "This ship is now under the control of General Sin. If you wish to live, surrender yourselves and become bondsmen under my command. Or you can take your chances." The clanners in the mech looks up and see that the other mechs have closed in and are surrounding them. After a few seconds, they surrender fully, and the battle is over. A few days later, after retrieving the stuck mechs and registering the new soldiers, it is time to move the group to Dallas. A small unit is left behind with the civilians to remain an outpost. Now, Sin has enough ships and weapons to take on an entire division. This is brought up in the next meeting. Clanner Delphine. Sir, we now have enough firepower to take on any city on this continent. General Sin. Are you proposing that we bring our arms to bear against the entire continent? Delphine. We can use sneak attacks, but the rest of the clan forces are disheartened by these attacks. We are a proud race, and look where it has gotten you, Sin says. Stranded on a remote planet on the edge of unknown space. Your pride has become a luxury you can no longer afford, Colonel. Clanner Garan comes in. Then what do you propose, sir? Sin. We need to get the new soldiers trained and ready as soon as possible. On top of that, there are only a few more months before winter, and the civilian workers are going to need help getting everything ready. Garan. Ready for what, sir? Sin. Unlike most planets you have been to, on this planet we have a change of seasons. It's summer now, and everything grows fine. Food is plentiful. Once it becomes winter, the air will be cold, and life will become harsh for everyone. Interpreter Don. He's right. The farther north or south you go, the more dramatic the change. This will deplete the other clan forces to varying degrees. Delphine. But the cold air will make it easier for us to use mechs. Sin. That won't matter if their soldiers are half starved and the equipment is not serviceable. Garan. So we're going to just sit here and wait? Sin. No. We're going to prepare. For the next few weeks, there is nonstop activity in Texas. Supplies are shuttled back and forth. Soldiers are trained. Children are being brought up in mainly Spartan ways. Civilians bringing life back to some semblance of normalcy, though it's far from normal for humans to see combat patrols and battle mechs every day. General Sin is constantly checking in on the progress of his soldiers and working with them as much as possible. In some cases, he helps dig ditches, or for runoff, or running cable for electricians. There's nothing he is not willing to do with his people, no matter how difficult or how simple the task. Everyone sees this and are inspired to push themselves even harder. In some cases, the clanners can't even tell which one of the worker and which one their leader is. Clanner Garan addresses him and says, Sir, why do you insist on working with the non-combatants? It does not seem right. Sin asks, why not? Garan says, it seems a bit degrading for someone of your stature and position to relegate yourself in such a way. Clanner Delphine, this is correct. The leader must be a figure for their people, a symbol of greatness of their post. Sin, what am I, some dumbass politician? I'm not that kind of a leader. Any leader that thinks themselves above the tasks of their subordinates is no longer a leader. They're just a dictator. Garan and Delphine look at each other for a moment, then take off their BDU tops and start working with Sin, as they seem to understand his words. When the day is over, Sin, Garan, and Delphine are able to look at what they've accomplished. This act of working with subordinates actually brings morale up. Delphine, I am beginning to see the worth of this work, though it still seems beneath our rank. Sin, perhaps, but you must keep a sense of humility. Delphine, we are humbled in battle. Sin, from what I can tell, only as bondsmen. Delphine, we are humbled by our losses. Sin, I still cannot understand that, though you still think of yourself as superior to these men and women. What makes my profession any more important than theirs? Of course, no answer. Sin reaches out and puts his hands on Delphine's shoulder. Look, you may be a clanner, but when you look over all the things you have done during the day, you will feel the same amount of pride, and you'll see that we're not so different. Delphine, I'm not sure I understand. You will. Once they're done, Delphine looked over the work they had completed. She gazes in a way that shows a light of understanding and a little bit of pride. As she turns away, she stands face to face with Garan. He has the same type of look on his face as he buttons his shirt. When not working with everyone, Sin is working on the next battle plan. The next closest clan outpost is Oklahoma City. It's a relatively small outpost with only one Daedalus-class dropship, a rather small one, and a single lance of mechs along with armor as protection, being used as a hub to relay information from the East Coast from the battle line of what remains of the U.S. Taking it out very well forced the clans to hold off any future attacks until relay stations can be reinforced. This would pull more of the clan forces away from the larger targets. The clan forces that were already under Sin's command were more than a little eager to get that party started. The outpost they were going after belonged to Clan Jade Falcon. In reading about clan history, these two clans really hate each other. In fact, they hate each other the most. So much that bloody wars had come around between the two. With 3 stars of mechs and 2 companies of armor, they set out. It will take 2 days to reach the outpost. That night, Sin looked at the stars again and saw the remnants of another ship burn up through the atmosphere. It made him sad to think how many lives have been lost and how many will still go to the other side soon. About mid-morning the next day, they had the outpost in sight. With air support on standby, it is now time to talk to the outpost. Now that Sin had learned some Latin, he could talk to the outpost directly. Sin, in broken Latin. This is General Sin calling Jade Falcon Outpost. You are outnumbered and outgunned, and I have no doubt in my mind that you will fight to the death. But I would rather have you live on as my bondsman. What say you? There was no answer over the radio for almost a full minute, but he could see the outpost was getting ready for a fight. He continued, Jade Falcon Outpost, I am issuing a trial of possession. Do you accept? Crackling across the radio, this is Star Captain Ian Kalsar, commander of this outpost. Name your bid. Sin responded, single combat, you and your mech against me and my mech. Kalsar, chuckling, do you insult me with this bid? You are freeborn. You will not prove to be any contest. Sin, do you wish to change the bid, Star Captain? Kalsar, neg, I will see you on the field, Freebirth. Sin, well bargained and done. All units hold position. This is my fight. Pushing the throttle forward on his direwolf, he is lumbering forward. It doesn't take long before Kalsar's vulture comes into view. Sin prepares a little surprise for Kalsar. As the vulture gets in range, the new targeting system that they pulled out of one of the Earth fighters locks almost instantaneously. This allows Sin the vital first hit. Kalsar's vulture takes the hit from the Gauss rifle and staggers from the hit but keeps advancing. He turns his legs and lets loose a few autocannon shots. Only one grazes Sin's mech. Sin holds his fire as the pulse lasers burn his armor. Just as Kalsar lets loose with his barrage of missiles, Sin uses what's known as Alpha Strike. That is, he fires all his weapons at once, all his direct fire weapons and missiles. Most of the missiles detonate prematurely, causing the vulture to stagger again, but the 2 Gauss rifle rounds hit the vulture's left side, forcing it to lose balance, stumble, and fall to the ground. Now with this vulnerable underbelly exposed, Sin awaits for his weapons to recharge and reload. The vulture is kicking, trying to right itself as Sin moves in to get a good shot at Kalsar's mech. With the heat still high, he knows that the next shot will shut down his mech as a safety precaution. So instead, he opens his radio. Star Captain Kalsar, your mech is disabled and I am in perfect firing position to kill you. Concede defeat and you will live under my command. Kalsar waits a few seconds as he begins to try and get his mech to stand back up. However, as he moves, he realized that Sin was not lying. He was in perfect strike position. Over the radio, Kalsar responds, Do I have your word that my subordinates will be treated with honor? Sin responds, Honor and respect, Star Captain. You will not be the first clan warriors to serve under my command. There was silence again. Kalsar put out a broad band. The trial is over. The battle is lost. Over a broadband spectrum, Sin said, Then I take you and your subordinate as my bondsmen. Jade Falcons, lower your weapons and hold all radio communications for any other forces. I want a full list of current supplies, equipment, and personnel when I get there. Colonel Grand, take control of Alpha and Bravo Lances and set up security. Colonel Delphine, you are to follow me to the outpost and assist in getting things ready to go. Call in one of our dropships and get all equipment and personnel out of here. When the Jade Falcons come in looking for their outpost, I don't want to be here. Everything goes like clockwork. With the landing of the second dropship, the entire outpost is removed from the map. Within 4 hours, the two dropships are heading back to Dallas and the mechs are making their long walk back. As thought, when the Falcons came looking for the outpost, it just wasn't there. It takes several days to totally process the personnel and equipment, along with the information, Falcon's movements, and resources. Clanner Delphine, it seems that the outpost was one of 3, but was a major factor in the attacks on the southern end of the Continental Divide. With the sudden loss of one of the outposts, the Falcons have pulled their forces back to protect the others. In essence, the loss of a single relay station was enough to halt the attacks of Jade Falcon units. Sin, well done, Colonel. It seems our assault created the desired effect. Delphine, then we should continue the advance. I still do not know why we do not hold the ground we took from the Falcons. Sin, deception can be just as good as a weapon as a missile. Strategically place either one and you can put an entire population into disarray. Delphine, I still do not understand why we could not just continue pushing across and taking out the entire clan. Sin, a little annoyed, states, regardless of your personal feelings, we do not have the capability to face them yet, not without taking massive losses, unsustainable losses. Delphine, how can you be so calm about losing ground? Sin, we have lost nothing. We got in and out without them knowing who attacked them or why. Delphine, how do you know that? Sin, have they attacked us yet? The Jade Falcon clan are one of the most bloodthirsty and reckless of all the clans. If they knew, they would have already come at us with everything at their disposal. For right now, we must be ready. Delphine asks, for what, sir? Sin responds, the next step.